So we think there's a chance. They said, but they will only nurse him here because the beds are so in demand. We will send him to the brain injury ward, which is on ward 23, which they did. We visited every day. We visited and did what we could. And bless the hospital, they fed us and they kept us going. And then they said, we're going to transfer him and move him because Leighton said they'd got a bed on ward 13 and that they would take him, the ward next to the nurses. This was several weeks later, as you can imagine. So we went, he was transferred to ward 13. We knew a girl who was a nurse on ward 13. And she said, when I tried to change his bed, because she lived across the way from me, she said, I turned the tap on. She said, and he moved his head like that, as though he'd heard the sound. She said, that's a good sign. She said, I can't promise anything else. She said, but I'm just saying it's a good sign. They kept him on ward 13 for about 3 weeks. And then a Dr. Jones, who had sole control over the brain and stroke injury unit in ward 6 in Leighton Hospital, and he said, look, this man only needs nursing now. We can't do anything else for his brain. So they said, it's just a healing process. Send him down to me. And we went down to Dr. Jones. He was next to the physio room because they wanted to start some physio on him because he'd lay there for weeks and not being able to move. And they were frightened of him not being able to move. Anyway, they did physio on him, massages and movements and all sorts of things. And that went on for about another 3 or 4 weeks. And then one day the doctor said to me, he said, we're going to have to get him to move. We're going to have to get him up. We're going to have to make his back strengthened. And I said, well, how are you going to do that? He said, I don't know. I don't know how we're going to do it. He said, let me think about it. So I started thinking and I thought, if we can sit him up in that chair at the side of the bed, it might strengthen his back. So I went to the market and I got some webbing, like that's on the side of anoraks that they put over the shoulders. And I made some clasps and fastenings and with the webbing to go around his feet, his ankles and the bottom of the chair legs, round his arms, and a big one round his chest and one round his tummy. And me and my husband mauled him into the chair, and I packed his head with cushions so the head wouldn't move forward. And he went, "Argh, argh." So I knew he felt that movement. So I said to Scott, I said, you're going to sit in this chair for 5 minutes. I said, and tomorrow you're going to sit in it for 6 minutes. And that's how we went on. Till in the end, he could sit in the chair without falling forward. Because the first time we tried it, we sat him in the chair without the straps on and he fell forward. And he fell onto the floor. Well, we got in awful trouble from the physios because we tried it ourselves. Anyway, eventually, he could sit up in the chair. He had assistance, but at least he could sit up. Well, this went on for several days. In the meantime, he was still having the physio, and he still went on the best way he could. I've got 2 sons. One of them is quite a high-class IT consultant, and I have got this courageous, masterful, wonderful, determined, and if I might say so, bloody-minded son who knew what he'd got to do. He must have realised, because all of a sudden his eyes started to flicker. And I thought, why are his eyes flickering? Does that mean there's something waking up? Anyway, eventually, after about eight or odd weeks, his eyes flickered, and the doctor said to me, "We've got to wake him up. We've got to wake him up, because he could be like this for 12 months. We've got to try and wake him up." And they said to me, "Have you got any animals at home?" I said, "Yeah, we've got a little dog." The doctor said, bring it in." I said, "What, in the hospital?" She said, "Yes, bring it in." So I took her in. She was a little tiny Yorkshire Terrier. And when the doctor saw her, she said, "Put her on the bed." I went, "On the bed in hospital?" He said, "Yes." Scott was lying with his legs slightly apart. I put her in between his legs, and she ran up the middle of him and up his body, and she licked his nose and his mouth, and he flicked his head like that. And then one of the nurses went, and walked out. And I ran after the nurse, and I said, "What are you doing that for? Why have you done that?" She said, "Your son's not going to die." I said, "How do you know that?" She says, "The dog told me." I said, "How did the dog tell you?" She said, "If your son was going to die, that dog would have smelt death on him and wouldn't have gone near him." She said, "He's not going to die." She says, "Now we've got our work cut out. We've got to do something now." So this carried on for a little while longer, and we kept noticing there were facial movements and twitches which we hadn't noticed before, because he was totally unconscious. And then all of a sudden there was total, and then one day we were sitting there, and all this time we'd had a visitors book for him, and all the people used to come in, sign the visitors book and put a comment underneath when we weren't there, because we used to go at 12 o'clock at dinner time till 9:30 at night, till we'd locked it, settled him into bed and everything. And one Sunday morning, it was quite amusing really, because he played pro footballer. He was a pro footballer. He had a semi-pro footballer. His football manager, the match was called off because the pitch was frozen. And he took the whole of the football team into the hospital to see Scott. And he said the nurse's station was agog, because all these men were walking in, and they were all going, "Woo," all these men walking in. And they stayed with him for 2 hours, joking and laughing, and that, funnily enough, started a system of twitches and movements and eye blinks. And then one day, I'm talking 2 or 3 weeks afterwards, one day he suddenly opened his eyes. There was nothing there, but he opened his eyes. But there was no expression in his eyes at all. And I said to my husband, I said, "He's opened his eyes, he's opened his eyes." My husband said, "Oh no, he hasn't." I said, "Yes, look." And he went, "My God, he has." And he'd opened his eyes. And then I started to talk to him, because the doctor had said to him, "Keep talking to him." So I started to talk to him, telling him all sorts of things, what had happened, what his mates had said. I used to read him the book, because I used to keep a diary of everything that had happened to him. I read the comments from the book to him, and all of a sudden these eyes started to, how can I say it, register really, and they used to follow sounds, but there was no sort of recognition that it absorbed what was there, but they followed the sounds. Eventually, one day, I said, "Scott," and he went, "Arr!" And I said to my husband, I said, he heard that. And then I started to talk to him more loudly and more frequently. And all of a sudden, the recognition started to come back. It took a long time, it took several weeks, but it started to come back. And one day I said to him, I got hold of his hand. His accident, his injuries were severe brain bruising, fractured skull, fractured cheekbones, 2 detached retinas, 4 broken ribs, collapsed lung, and he was paralysed all down his right side. So we've got some work to do. Anyway, they sent some people from Hayward Hospital to see if he needed to be transferred to them for physio sessions. Dr. Jones in his wisdom said, no, we can have physio here. So we went and we had the physio there at Leighton. And then one day I said to Scott, I got hold of his left hand, which was all shaking like this, and I banged it on my chest. I said, who's this? Who's this? And he went, but he couldn't say it. But I knew what he was trying to say, but he couldn't say it. And I said to him, Scott, you've got to help me in this. You've got to help me. So I thought, how can I help him to realise that I'm here and we're all here for him? So I thought, and he couldn't speak. He couldn't utter a sound. He was like a baby. Like when he first came round from his accident, he couldn't speak. He'd forgotten everything. He was a child again. He'd forgotten how to toilet himself. He'd forgotten everything. He couldn't speak. He couldn't express himself. He couldn't do anything. So we had to start from scratch. I had to re-toilet train him again. A man of 23. He was 23 when he had his accident, and he was 24 a few days afterwards. And his accident was on the 6th of October 1998, and he was 24 on the 10th of October 1998. 11th of October 1998. So he had his 24th birthday in a coma. Anyway, I thought, how can I get him to recognise things? So I devised a word board. I built a cardboard like that, and I put double-edged Velcro on it. And I got a plain board at the side with double-edged Velcro on it. And I got one of the secretaries at work and asked her if she would get laminated an alphabet. And she did it for me, and I stuck them on this board, A to Z, right. I knew he could see, because he'd proved that, because he was watching people. And then I said to him, I got his hand again. I said, what's your name? What's your name? And I banged it on his chest. What's your name? And to my astonishment, he started to pull the letters off. S. And stick them on the other side, because I told him what to do. And stick them on the other side. And he got S-C-O-T, because his name's Scott. And then he started to bang the other T. And I thought, what's he doing that for? There's 2 T's in Scott. And I hadn't accounted for that. And I thought, wow, that's my mistake. So I got in touch with the secretary again. I said, can you do me a smaller version that I can stick underneath the others? The next day I did it, and he spelt Scott.